The Building Brands podcast is dedicated to exploring the journeys of industry leaders who have successfully built a brand. Join me, Robert Royer, president of Building Brands Marketing, and an entrepreneur who has successfully scaled multiple brands as we dive deep into the strategies, challenges, and insights that have shaped the success of industry leaders and provide you with the resources you need to do the same. Building Brands Marketing is a full-service marketing agency specializing in crafting customized marketing strategies for service-based businesses with a creative powerhouse to drive real results. Welcome to the Building Brands Podcast. Welcome to the Legal Leaders series of the Building Brands Podcast. I'm excited today to welcome Alyssa Devine, owner and managing attorney with Purple Fox Legal PLLC. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Absolutely. So let's start with your story. What inspired you to go into law and what led you to open your firm, Purple Fox Legal?
I had a bit of not exactly a straight path, but my introduction to entrepreneurship actually began through my grandfather, who's a farmer. So I would see him and occasionally help him out in the field, working the crops and growing his his beans and his corn. But I realized, later on that that's a very risky business, not just dangerous, but risky, because you can't control the weather. That's a risk you have to try to mitigate through like crop insurance. The pest, insects and pests eating up your profits. That's another risk you have to mitigate. Well, that's what pesticides are for. So figuring out how to mitigate those risks as best as possible in order to, get the highest yield possible so you get bring the most money home. That's what his business was about. So thinking in terms of that, okay, well, how can I, use the law to help people with their businesses and mitigate risks that they see in their business? That's kind of how I like to think of how the law can help people. It's not just about the legal risk, it's also about business risk. And sometimes people have trouble identifying which is which, but I think it's really important to have both of those perspectives in mind before making a major decision and understanding the consequences of potential decisions.
Definitely. So how did you land on the branding and the aesthetics, I guess the branding and the name of Purple Fox Legal?
Yeah, so I started Purple Fox Legal during the pandemic. So it needed to stand out online because that's where people were going to find their attorneys or legal services. And, I had an understanding of how to use technology, how to use social media. So I had a little bit of advantage, I think, over some other firms, but I wanted it to be very distinguishable, and I didn't want to use my last name because that's what everybody else does. I wanted to be different. So I came up with Purple Fox Legal. So purple represents wisdom and creativity. So something, kind of aspects that I try to use in how I practice the law. And then fox for kind of cleverness and getting out of tricky situations, which is what you want your lawyer to try to help with once you're in a bad situation. And then legal, just to, kind of distinguish, okay, hey, this is something legal. These are legal services being provided. And then I wanted sort of an abstract logo, something that sort of could withstand the test of time. And that could be just very recognizable to people that were looking for legal services. And it worked really, really well. I started going to networking events, and people would always remember Purple Fox, but they wouldn't remember my name, but they remember Purple Fox. And I remember at one specific meeting, somebody come up to me and say, "Oh yes, I remember meeting you before. You're Purple Fox, right? I don't remember your name, but you're Purple Fox." And I'm like, yes, that is my new name, Purple Fox. Might as well change it because that's what everybody recognizes and responds to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really cool brand, and I can tell that there's a lot of thought and kind of consideration that went into it. I know that you practice business law as a whole, but you've really built a niche around trademarks and trademark law specifically. I'm curious, could you walk our listeners and viewers through the exercise of how you defined that as a core niche to really, double down and just specialize in even further?
I think my interest in trademark law and intellectual property as a whole really stems from my activities during law school. And it was kind of like how you go out to dinner, right? And you look at the menu. You always want to be given a menu. And you're like, oh, I might get this, I might get this. But then you always end up getting the same thing, right? Well, that was kind of me and my law school activities. I'd kind of explore and kind of taste around. But I kept coming back to trademark law and intellectual property. And that's just kept where my interest kept coming back to. So I took the classes, and I reached out to professors and attorneys in the area, had informational interviews with them, and I just became more and more interested. And what I kept hearing from them is that trademark law has a very close relationship with business. So I was thinking, okay, like how can I, distinguish myself, in the, all the law school graduates and a number of applicants that they might receive per position. And I decided to also get my MBA while in law school. So that was
Congrats.
a very challenging experience. But I got to kind of perfect my time management skills for sure. But it was a very interesting experience because law school is very individualistic, and the MBA program was very team oriented. So I kind of had to see both worlds there, on top of obviously the different disciplines and specific subjects that were encountered during both of those programs. But the more I learned about it, the more interested I was, the more excited I got about it. And I think it's also exciting because you get to see the results of your work in the world, which is not, something not a lot of other attorneys can necessarily say. When somebody has a registered trademark, well, you see it, blasted all over social media. In other places, sometimes you see it in the store. They're selling products. So it's rewarding in that way.
Yeah, I do want to kind of take a sideways step here for a second,
Sure.
because leading up to today's discussion, I know one thing that you shared with me, being, I don't know, around 8 years or so in business now, you've you've mentioned that you intentionally have avoided hiring another associate attorney due to one reason or another. And I'm just curious, could you elaborate to our audience kind of your thought on that, and, the, I guess, harm or help it could produce to the firm?
Absolutely. So, I mean, when you're I think the first thing most people may not understand is that there's a very big difference between a 1099 contractor and an employee, right? So I've hired 1099
Yeah.
contractors. Like, you can't have
Yep.
a business without hiring other 1099 contractors for things. Like, it's pretty much impossible in this day and age. So I've
Hmm.
I've, I've certainly done that. But hiring an employee is a lot of responsibility and a lot of risk that I'm just not personally willing to take, at least not at this time in my life.
Hmm.
And that's not to say that, nobody should, because, people definitely should, but it's a risk and a responsibility. Like, the amount of time that you have to take to train somebody and how your business works is significant. And that takes away
Yeah.
time for you to, focus on revenue generating tasks. And this is, all sort of like a gamble, because that person may not stay very long. They may stay a year. They may stay less than a year. They may stay 10 years, but who really knows? You don't, especially not in the beginning. And, there's a lot of, uh, you know, I guess tax and legal, liability involved there. Well, if I'm providing somebody access to, all of my, or, a significant portion of my, client data, well, that means I'm responsible for them under the professional rules of responsibility. Like, their acts can put my license on the line, and my license
Hmm.
is my livelihood, right? So, it's just a lot of risk for me that I'm personally not willing to take. But it's just kind of, each person has to decide, what's in there, what are the risk and benefits of that decision, and are they willing to take that risk on somebody? And right now, for me, I'm not. Right now, I'm perfectly, fine with hiring 1099s, and that's worked out very well for me. So it just kind of
Yeah,
depends on the person.
definitely. And that's interesting. I do find that there's a lot of confusion, especially with smaller entities on contractor versus employees and what you can ask of each of them. And
Correct.
on the
Yeah.
flip side, I've experienced the flip side of it where you don't have certain control over certain aspects with
Hmm.
contractors
True.
as it relates to certain fixed meetings, even potential turnaround on certain assignments where if
Right.
I know the full workload of that person, if they're a W-2 employee and I know the full workload of their assignments for the week
Hmm.
with approximate time, I can go in and self-manage that project portfolio to reprioritize things where you can't necessarily do that with a contractor. You can't tell them to reprioritize other projects that aren't even your company's projects,
Hmm.
those sort of things. So
Yeah.
I've kind of
Very
I've
true.
seen both the pros and the cons, and then I've also seen the flip side of, well, especially if that employee um, specializes in one specific area
Hmm.
of if work dries up in that one specific area, now you have that trying to field tasks to be able to justify the revenue or the expense is ultimately a payroll for that role,
Hmm.
where they may be now outside of their wheelhouse and outside of their strengths, which can lead to
Hmm.
demoralization, can
Hmm.
lower quality of work, all these sort of things. So
Absolutely.
I understand both the pros and the cons. And I've seen it on both play out on both sides. I think a lot of times there's a lot of confusion, uh, especially with like first time business owners,
Hmm.
of what they can require of a 1099
Yeah.
contractor and as opposed to W-2, and then as well as vice
Yep.
versa, of not knowing the long term risks of a 1099. Hey, you're unpleased with a project, you can you know terminate the business relationship before the next project. It's not as easy, obviously, with the W-2 employee.
Hmm.
Uh, so
Exactly.
I like your stance of kind of looking all the way through, looking at the full picture. And I am curious though, because
Yeah.
one of the challenges of that is then by the very nature, you're more at line as a business owner, than maybe another business owner with dozens of employees or whatever. So it creates a need for you to kind of play on both sides of the field, play a little bit of offense, play a little bit of defense,
Hmm.
to try to compensate for both sides. Are there any systems or tools, softwares that you would recommend that have helped you kind of stay efficient and stay lean in your organization?
I think, at least for my particular business, like scheduling, any kind of scheduling system like Calendly and other things like that, or anything that can integrate with my calendar system is really really good, because I can't just, if somebody calls or emails, I'm not going to be able to get to them right away. If
Sure.
in my mind, if it's really important, they're going to make an appointment. Well, they're able to make an appointment through my website. So it's kind of like, that's kind of all in their control to do that. And then it pops up on my calendar, and then it's scheduled instead of the constant back and forth, back and forth. Well, if we email back and forth for, to schedule a time to
It,
talk about something, that could take over a week just to schedule it. Whereas if now that I have, this, calendar system, an ability to schedule something on my uh, website, well, that can take them 10 minutes or less than, really. So that's like completely within their control. So I'm kind of giving more control to, the client or potential client in a way, in some ways. Um, and so in the, I kind of have cutting back on phone calls quite a bit, which has actually helped me a lot. So I'm kind of trying to kind of funnel communications into either email or scheduled appointment. So, and that doesn't work for everybody, and that's totally fine. I understand that. But all that really tells me is that, if that doesn't work for you, you may not be the right fit for me, because that's how my business is going to work, and that's how I'm able to get things done, in a timely manner.
Well, Alyssa, one of the advantages of being lean is you can be more selective of the
Correct.
right fits of clients for
Exactly.
you. That leads to a more mutually beneficial relationship as well. So, like, you can be a little bit more selective compared to if you had,
Yep.
20 employees or whatever.
Yeah.
One of the things I really like about not just Calendly, like I use Go High Level. I'm an advocate of Go High Level for all of our clients. That I really enjoy about Go High Level as well. Same functionality is two things with the calendar function that you're describing. A, it also sends the reminders leading up to the meeting, and so if someone needs to reschedule or
Mhm.
cancel, it prompts them to do so depending on
Right.
how you set it up. But like I like to do 24-hour reminders, 1 hour
Mhm.
reminders, so I get less no shows that I show up to when they knew a day in advance they were already going to
Right.
cancel, and then that time was
Right.
booked out on my calendar.
Right.
um, and then vice versa. The other thing is, um, with my entity, we have certain consultants that will offer a free initial marketing consultation. However, myself, I charge an hourly rate, even the first consultation.
Mhm.
And so I could attach a payment component to my booking system where when
Mhm.
someone does book a consultation on my calendar for one of those 1 hour consults, it sends them the payment link and it requires
Right.
them to prepay ahead of time to have that
Right.
meeting. Because I found myself having these meetings and then bill for 1 hour at a time, and then later on I'm having to chase this $175 around, to get
Yep.
payment later. And it's like, uh, you know
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, a massive inefficient use of my time to try to
It
chase
is.
around a one-time 1 hour payment,
It
if
is.
they didn't turn into reoccurring business down the road. So those are some other advantages. Any other software that you feel was really pivotal to helping you scale your firm?
I think that's kind of like one of the ones that has had the most return on investment. I've tried a number of different, like client relationship management softwares, but
Hmm.
haven't really found one that I particularly like, um, for whatever reason. So I think that's kind of interesting. It seems to me that there's probably a gap in the market for something that's affordable and does everything that I want it to. So there's not really one, at least that meets all of my needs and also, kind of tracks KPIs that are you can make actionable decisions on. There are tons that'll track KPIs, but I don't care about KPIs. I care about KPIs that I can make a decision about. That's a very different thing. So I haven't really found any that I like yet. So unfortunately, but I
Yeah,
try
that's
and I try different softwares and kind of see what it's about. And sometimes it's kind of helpful, but other times maybe it's not. I use
yeah.
GPT and Claude for different marketing things. So I have a ton of different blog articles. Well, I can kind of say, hey, chat GPT, can you summarize this blog article and write a video script that's no longer than 60 seconds or something like that. Well, that's a pretty efficient use of my time, and it's based on content that was written by a human. So that's kind of nice instead of something completely made up by AI, which could be false. You give false information.
Yeah.
So
and
just
and as
things
we
to be
know,
aware of.
in the legal industry as of this
Yeah,
year, that can be very problematic.
it's
It's
too bad.
yeah, we've had some major national suits come across the desk this year related to certain legal
Yeah.
professionals using AI. Well, I think kind of what I working with many lawyers, what I find is the industry standard for marketing, CRM, and client management system is Clio Grow and Clio Manage. That seems to be kind of the industry standard. However, it can get fairly pricey. For our listeners, that's one that I can say is very reputable. I know that they're a good product. I know a number of firms that use it. Also on the CRM side or the marketing automation system side, highly recommend Go High Level because it's very, very affordable. I mean, $100 a month, and it's very all in one system, and it works very, very well for all the firms that I know that have utilized it. Now, one other tool that I would recommend to most other law firms, service providers in general, law firms, doctors, would be some note-taking tool, such as Google has a built-in Gemini AI tool now that can record and transcribe your meeting notes later. I use MeetGeek personally. That's kind of my favorite, and that's extremely useful for me because it takes away the necessity for me to hand take all my notes, well, type them, and anymore in my meetings, which although I type pretty fast, like it wasn't a major hindrance. A lot of times when I get out of a meeting, especially like lawyers, when you're going back to back meetings all day, you get out and a meeting 4 meetings ago, you may have forgotten certain components from that meeting. So I can go back and watch that video or read those video notes in order to, reestablish my thoughts as I'm going into the actionable work later post meeting. So those are a couple softwares, MeetGeek, Go High Level, I'd recommend to law firms.
Yeah, I think those are probably good software to check out. I will say that most attorneys probably don't record their meetings or their phone calls, and especially wouldn't allow any kind of note-taking app to have access to those recordings due to confidentiality concerns. Because if you look in a lot of those software's terms of service, they allow, they would basically break that confidentiality. So that'd probably be something most lawyers wouldn't be willing to try.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, or at least during a confidential type phone call.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Well, is there any book that you would recommend to other entrepreneurs or business executives that's just a book you've really enjoyed and got a lot out of, Alyssa?
I would say Building a Story Brand. I think that's probably one of the best books I've read in the past maybe year or so. It is really important to have some kind of coherent story for your business, but like people just need to be able to digest things easily, right? So the more complicated you make it, the more people are not going to understand it, and the more they're going to be turned off by your website or by your your ad copy or whatever. So making it simple but making it also relatable, and then the way the easiest way to do that is to make it into a story. So I think Building a Story Brand is a really, really good book. If you haven't read it before, then that's something I'd recommend to readers.
It's a great one. I haven't read it myself, so I'm gonna write
It's
that
good.
one down. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Alyssa, where can our listeners and viewers find more about Purple Fox Legal online?
Purplefoxlegal.com. I made it very simple.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank
Thanks for being on the show, Alyssa.